Hi, scholars. In this video, we're now going to be talking about the two different types of trusters. Now, before we get into these two different types, it's important to understand that neither of them is inherently, morally, or ethically superior to the other. It's much more defined in how a person's mind processes trust. And it's also important to understand that while we talk about these two different types in their kind of definitional extremes, it really is a continuum. So you will likely not be an absolute low truster or an absolute high truster. You'll be someplace on a continuum, but you will probably tend to favor or lean towards one or the other. It is also important to note that in the face-to-face class, sometimes I get a question, is it possible for somebody to change? Absolutely. Oftentimes it is through our life experiences that kind of helps mold which type of truster we are. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. And we will get started with the first type, a low truster. A low truster is somebody that believes that trust must be earned. Now, all humans by nature, we are pleasure seekers and pain avoiders, but most of us tend more towards one or the other. A low truster tends more towards avoiding pain than seeking pleasure. So taking risks is a little less likely for them. A quote that might describe a low truster is that if you never trust anyone, you can't be betrayed. So avoiding ever being betrayed is a particularly important goal for them. So what I would like to do, just to kind of illustrate the effect of this, is I want to do a little bit of an activity. In this activity, I want you to think about the best friend you've ever had in your life. Okay. Now I want you to think about the person that betrayed you the most. Now exclude from both of these things like family. You didn't choose your parents, although hopefully they're not the ones that ever betrayed you. But think about somebody that you chose to trust, and as a result, you got hurt by that. So, question. Would you be willing to give up that best friend in order to also give up that betrayal? So you don't experience the betrayal, but you also don't have that best friend. Now, this isn't an entirely fair activity, because in this instance, you actually know the best friend. But what somebody might say to a low truster is, do you really want to give up the chance that, one of the people that you chose not to give a chance to would have turned into that best friend, just so you can avoid the risk that the person you give trust to ends up being the person that betrayed you? And again, it's not entirely a fair activity, because the easy response, of course, if you never knew the best friend, you wouldn't miss the best friend. So you wouldn't know what you're giving up. But that's a low truster. So a low truster, the way that trust tends to be earned is, at first, if you think of this like you're building a bridge, a brick bridge. At first, the low truster, when they meet somebody, if they decide, yes, this person seems pretty good, pretty cool, they'll give them one brick, and they see how they handle that. So in this, it's, yeah, visit with them, talk to them. They might, or her, they might share some information about themselves, not real deep secrets. They don't really trust the person that much. And then after a while, and this person has demonstrated that, they seem pretty cool, then the low truster might need something. I really need help with my deck. That person's indicated that they are pretty good with woodworking and carpentry and stuff like that. So they say, listen, I'm working on my deck. Can you come over on Saturday and help me? And the person says yes. Now they're giving them a brick here, a brick of trust. They're trusting the person's going to show up on Saturday. Saturday comes, the person's there 7 in the morning with their tools ready to go, and they earn that brick. They earn more trust. And as time goes on, as the person is consistent, they keep their word. They, don't betray confidences and trusts and things like that. They get more and more bricks over the years, and eventually there's a bridge there. until at some point the person the low truster trusted does something. Maybe they're drinking too much one day and they say a secret that they weren't supposed to reveal. The low truster, who is naturally more pain avoider than pleasure seeker, it's almost like all the benefit they got from this relationship, all the good they got from this relationship becomes far less meaningful. And they're like, I knew I shouldn't have trusted that person. See, this is what happens when you trust somebody every single time. You trust them and they betray you. They're not actually, as much as it seems like they're attacking the other person, really what they're doing is they're pounding themselves. They're attacking themselves like, how could I have been so stupid? It was because I trusted the person. In other words, it's my fault for trusting that person. And then maybe after a while, the person who violated the trust comes over and is very contrite and says, hey, listen, I am so sorry for what I did. I should not have been drinking and I shouldn't have done that. And they're really apologetic and explain what they did wrong and that they would never do that again. And that they understand the low truster doesn't, why the low truster is mad. You're perfectly justified. I'd be upset too. All of these things in the low truster, all they can get from the low truster here is the chance to re-earn trust. Because the low truster doesn't really give trust. Trust can be earned. And so what they're doing by showing how apologetic they are and such, maybe the low truster starts to think about, oh gosh, he was there that morning to help me with my deck, and we spent a lot of time going fishing and or dancing or whatever, all these different things, and they're like, I don't want to lose that friend. So those, say, 3 or 4 bricks that were destroyed are still not there, but the low truster is willing to let the person earn that trust back. And so they're like, okay, well, listen, that was really, whatever, and but we can get past this. Time goes on, the person earns another brick. A while later, the person earns another brick. It's not that the low truster forgets the betrayal that happened, it just becomes less and less significant again as the person is validating that trust over and over again, and eventually they can actually get the entire bridge built again. So that's the way a low truster's mind processes trust. That to get a low truster's trust, you have to effectively gain their acceptance to allow you to earn trust. This isn't like a formal thing where they formally, say, okay, you can now start earning trust. It's not like that, but you have to really kind of get their mind to allow you to begin to earn that trust. And the way that happens is that they give you some trust. They might share more information about themselves, rely on you to come and help them with their deck or whatever it is. Okay. Contrast that now with the second type, a high truster. A high truster believes that distrust must be earned. So remember, a low truster believes that trust must be earned. A high truster believes that distrust must be earned. In that pleasure seeker, pain avoider thing, they are far more the pleasure seeker. So they would look at, like, if they meet 100 people and 20 of them become friends, and they weren't as selective in who they trust, they weren't as skeptical, 2 of those people might betray them in some way, but 1 or more of those other 18 people might end up being a really, really special friend that adds a lot of joy to their life. So they would say, I will take the pain of 2 people doing something that hurts me or upsets me and then just get rid of them in order to get those best friends. A quote that is sometimes used to describe the high truster is, I give my trust freely, but guard it carefully. For if you lose it, you will not get it back. See, a high truster, they kind of start with the bridge. You don't earn trust. Their mind doesn't really process the idea of earning trust. They give trust freely. If the high truster's trust is broken, you don't get it back because their brain doesn't actually process giving trust. It doesn't process earning trust. So let's say a high truster has that similar friend that the low truster did that ends up betraying that trust. So 3 or 4 bricks are gone. And the person might be trying to earn those bricks back, but the high truster's brain doesn't really work that way. It doesn't work towards, okay, you earn the trust back, and eventually, yes, I remember what happened and I'm upset what happened, but okay. Now imagine a low truster coming across a high truster, and they might at first be thinking, boy, this high truster is a fool. You shouldn't trust somebody like this. Now realize also by trust, keep in mind, it is a belief, it is not a behavior. A high truster does not mean that you're giving out your social security number or letting people borrow your credit card or anything like that. Your behavior might be very, very similar to the low truster, where you don't actually share a ton of secrets because you're reserved. It could be that you don't rely on people because you've been taught the value of independence, and relying on people can cause something not to get done. So your behavior might actually kind of show more of a low truster. But you generally believe in the benevolence of somebody when you first meet them. You don't believe that people are out to hurt you. You believe that most people would prefer not to hurt you. Most people would prefer not to take advantage of you. If somebody says something, unless you have reason to believe that they're lying, you're more inclined to think that they're probably telling the truth. So if a low truster is somebody who lost those bricks of trust and goes to the high truster and is trying to earn that trust back, and the high truster doesn't actually give the trust back. They seem to kind of hold on to the fact that the betrayal happened. And they'll be like, no, everything's fine. I mean, I forgive you. And the low truster is just frustrated because they can tell that something is now missing. The relationship is different now because of that betrayal, and they don't understand how to fix it. And so they're like, can't you just forgive me for that? And the high truster is like, I have forgiven you. And they have, potentially. But this is where it comes into that huge distinct difference between forgive and forget. Sometimes people say, forgive and forget. And we use these words sometimes as distinct, but also sometimes interchangeably. And it's important to understand the big difference between them. Forget means it's wiped from your memory. It says you actually don't even remember that it occurred. As a result, you also forget the lessons. So it doesn't inform future decisions. Forgive means you still can inform your decisions with what you learned from that, but you have forever given up the right to get even. And let me give you an example. Probably the most important person in the world to me is my little girl. As of the recording of this video, she's 9 years old now. She just turned 9, and my niece is 18. She babysits sometimes, and she's very, very responsible. I mean, I use this as an example, knowing that this would never occur. But if my niece's negligence while watching my little girl led to my little girl getting hurt, and then my niece came and was contrite and apologized, said that she was sorry, my faith actually obligates that I am to forgive her, which means I would never seek to get even with her. However, she would never watch my child again. Okay? What happened, the lesson learned from what happened, informs my future decisions. However, I don't try to get even with her. That's the difference between forgive and forget. So a high truster can forgive, and oftentimes is very forgiving. That doesn't necessarily mean that they forget. So, and also the low truster might, forgive but not forget too. So, to sum this up, a low truster, trust must be earned. A high truster, distrust must be earned. So a low truster starts with distrust. When a low truster meets somebody, their inclination is to not believe that this person is generally benevolent and would not knowingly do them harm. They're far more of the belief that somebody would try to take advantage of them if they can. A high truster tends to believe that people are generally benevolent. And when they meet somebody, their default assumption is that this person wouldn't try to hurt them. For a low truster, if somebody earns their trust, then they trust them. For a high truster, If somebody earns their distrust, if they give them reason not to trust them, then they get their distrust. Okay? And again, it is far easier for a low truster to have somebody earn their trust than a high truster. A high truster defaults to trust, but once the person earns their distrust, they tend to have it. I want to talk for a few moments about this idea of trust. For one thing, people oftentimes mistake trust for gullibility. So when they think of a high truster and they hear the definition of it, their default belief is a high truster is gullible. No. Trust and gullibility are actually fundamentally different. They're not even processed in the brain in the same way. Trust is a characteristic belief. It's a process competence. Gullibility is relying on someone that has demonstrated that they're not reliable. So in other words, gullibility is a behavior, it's a performance competence. So one is a process competence, trust. The other, gullibility, is a performance competence. They're fundamentally different. In addition to that, trust is that you believe they would not knowingly do you harm, and you believe they're generally benevolent, but if they show that they're not, then your belief in that goes down. So a high truster, if somebody is shown that they're not trustworthy, a high truster, they starts to distrust them. They're earning the high truster's distrust. Gullibility is that you're relying on somebody even after they've demonstrated that they're unreliable. So if we were to take relying, the behavior, even if we transferred it into process competence, even if we made that trust and said it's trusting someone that has demonstrated that they're untrustworthy, it's still fundamentally different. Because again, a high truster, as a person is showing they're not trustworthy, they would be earning the distrust of a high truster. They wouldn't trust them. With gullibility, it's when they're relying on them or trusting them. If we switched it to behavior, to belief, then they're trusting them even when they've shown that they're not untrustworthy. Okay, so they're fundamentally different from one another. The other subject that I want to talk about briefly, and we're going to go through this a little bit quickly. This is actually a class discussion that we would have, and I thought about making this a discussion forum for the hybrid or online class. I decided against that, and I think you'll see why in a moment. The question that I posed to the class is it okay to break the trust of a child? This is kind of a special case. People who wouldn't even imagine that it's okay to betray the trust of a friend, an adult, oftentimes believes that betraying the trust of a child is different, and it is. But when is it okay to do that? When should you do that? And the first scenario that I pose is if a friend's 10-year-old child comes to you and confides in you that they have tried smoking a cigarette. They didn't like it, made them sick, and they never want to do it again. Now, this was told to you in confidence with the understanding you would not tell their parents. In fact, they tell you that if their parents found out, their parents would beat them, would kill them. Would you violate that confidence and trust? Now, we're not going to discuss this, obviously, but I would like, if you don't mind, for you to pause the video for a moment and really think about that. In this situation, would you tell your friends, the parents, and break this trust with the child? Okay, so hopefully you've given that some good thought. Sometimes in the class discussion, one of the things that's brought up is the child's already been punished. They tried it, they didn't like it, they got sick, they've already learned the lesson. But I would make it clear that if they do it again, then all bets are off. I'm going to tell their parents. Others say I would tell their parents, but I would ask them to basically, like, I just want to tell you what's going on so that you can be watching this. And in the scenario I bring up in class, I apparently forgot to write it here, is that some of their friends in school were talking them into it, and they gave in and did it. But say, this is what's going on. This is the information I gathered, as I was saying. So what's the friends' names that said this, so I can, what we're talking, refer to them by name or whatever. Don't let the child know that I told you, with the idea of trying to protect that trust, but letting the parents know. Others have said that I would encourage the child to tell the parents, even going so far as to go with the child when the child does. The idea that I will protect you. And I've had people say, I would say to the child, sorry, I can't keep that secret. This is something you need to tell your parents, and if you don't tell them by a certain time, then I will. And still others have said I would call their parents right away and we would tell them immediately. I wouldn't even wait. So a lot of variation. I've also had people say I would never tell the parents. I wouldn't betray the trust of the child. I would try to teach the child not to give into peer pressure. I would use this as a teaching environment, a teaching moment, but I would not tell the parents under any circumstances. So I wanted to change the scenario a little bit, especially geared towards the idea that in this circumstance, the child was punished effectively by natural consequences. And natural consequences can be the best teacher. So I changed the scenario a little bit. And now think of this one. It's the same friend's 10-year-old child from the previous example, but this time they confide in you that they stole a candy bar from the store. They promise not to do it again, but they've already eaten the candy bar, so they can't return it. What would you do? So if you don't mind, pause the video for just a moment and really think through, what would you do in this scenario? Okay. Some comments that sometimes are made in the class discussion is some of the people that said, I wouldn't tell with the cigarette, some of them say, now I would. Because the cigarette, they got sick, they got a negative punishment, a negative consequence for what they did, but with the candy bar, they were rewarded, and I would want to stop it. Others have said that this is breaking the law. Of course, at least as of the recording of this video, a 10-year-old smoking is illegal also. Trying to think of some of the other answers. Many of them stuck to the same answer, that they would basically do the same thing. In this instance, because property was taken, another common one was that they would bring the child back to the store and the child would have to pay for the candy bar and apologize. It was brought up in the discussion, well, what if the child doesn't have the money for the candy bar? And a response sometimes is, well, I'll give them the money, but then the child has to do chores for me to pay it back. And if they don't, then I'm telling their parents, and their parents will make them do it. Or whatever. So there's a lot of variation in the answer to this one as well. So here's the main lesson. There actually isn't an objectively correct answer in either of those scenarios as to what you should do. It has a lot to do with your own values, perhaps your own experiences have informed your decision, whatever. The key thing here, always consider the cost of betraying that trust. There are circumstances when the trust of anybody should be violated. If your best friend, even as an adult, confides in you that they're going to do something that is going to really hurt another person, maybe that's a time that you should violate their trust to try to prevent them from hurting another person. So we're constantly faced with this. But with a child, there is a huge cost to violating their trust. Not that there isn't for an adult, but there is a really big one for the child. Right now, a child stealing that candy bar or smoking a cigarette or a variety of other things that they might be confiding in you is really significant. It's a really significant secret that they are entrusting in you. If they are given pain because they trusted you, if that trust is betrayed, they learn, never trust this person with a big secret again. Some years from now, maybe the secret is their boyfriend or girlfriend is trying to tell them that if they really loved them, they would do something that you don't think that they ought to be doing. Maybe later it's going to be something involving a much bigger thing than cigarettes. Maybe the peer pressure is going to be to do something far bigger than what these are. So the point being is that guarding and valuing the trust of a child is extremely important. And this doesn't mean that you never violate the trust of a child. It just means that you really need to consider the cost before you do it. And again, in these scenarios, there's no correct answer. So thank you very much. Pretty long video, but we got through interpersonal trust. And thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for watching the video, and I will see you in the next video.